Hello, everybody. Today we're covering the updates to Slaves to Darkness for Age of Sigmar, which I've just been getting into recently. I'm gonna make a how to play series, but I figured I would just do a video on this because there's definitely some changes here in terms of the points updates, which is pretty interesting, and I figured I would just cover it. So, first up, Bellicor got a pretty big points hike. That's around, what, like 9% more expensive? He was really good, though, so I'm not surprised he got a points hike. He's not really a unit I would like to use, but he was very good, and I would say significantly less so now. Centaurion Marshall, I think, is actually really interesting, because he offers some buffs to undivided units, which does pair well with Bellicor, of course. And at minus 20 points, I think he is a lot more interesting, because before I felt he was lacking because he couldn't buff anything with a Mark of Chaos, only undivided units. But now that he's only 160 points, I think he's a fine addition to an army. Chaos Lord really did need the points decrease. He was way too expensive for what he did. He just lacked the punch, really, to be worth 140. So really nothing worth. He's now significantly better. I think he's now actually worth bringing for more than just being cool. Chaos Lord and Demonic Mount didn't get any changes, which I think is fine. Chaos Knights are plenty strong. They might have gotten a points increase, but I think the update for the Demonic Mount is fine. Karkadrak is an interesting buff because I thought he was already pretty solid with his double buffing ability to make your units get to combat faster. Though I do think it's good that he got a points decrease, because I did think he was pretty heftily worse than the Chaos Lord and Demonic Mount. I'm really sad the Manticore characters didn't get any sort of buffs because they're way too expensive for what they do. Though I get they're really old. They don't want them being too good. So Demon Prince got a points bump. That I think I understand why. It's mainly because he can offer that increase, or he can offer you once per turn, Favorite of the Pantheon or Eye of the Gods rolls, which is undeniably a really powerful thing, and I understand why they'd want to buff. Would want to make that a little bit more expensive, so he's not quite as much of a snowball unit as he was before. But it is a little, I think he's still going to be a solid enough character in my opinion. So the Dark Oath Chief on horse, I'm not super well versed on the Dark Oath, but I think the Dark Oath, one of their problems was their characters weren't that cheap. So I think it is good that they got a little bit cheaper. At least the Warsteed one did. Because, Dark Oath characters are still really expensive. Like, the War Queen is more expensive than a Chaos Lord, which is just absurd, but Dark Oath have a lot of interesting buffs you can do, so I guess it makes sense. Glad to see Eternus go down a little bit. I thought he was overcosted compared to the normal Demonic Mount Lord, and it is useful just to have him be a little cheaper. He's a good way to get in Furies. Really the only way to get in Furies outside of using auxiliaries. Exalted Hero of Chaos, glad he went down. He's much better at 120 in my opinion. I think he works really well as just an addition to an army. He's really good at fighting monsters. Always useful to have in an army. Not that they struggle with that, but he can be useful to roam the midboard and sort of do that. Glad to see the Gaunt Summoner on Disc of Tzeentch go down, because this guy had a good data sheet or a war scroll, but was really expensive. He was super fragile, but I think he gained some ground on the on-foot Gaunt Summoner, who I'd still say is probably better. So Gunnar Brand, he's one of the... he's an epic hero type beat. I'm not super familiar with Gunnar Brand, but I believe he has some... it's good that he went down just to give Dark Oath a little bit more muscle, because he's a little bit better than most Dark Oath are at fighting. And of course, he has some good... oh god, what am I trying to say here? His 4+ ward rule is very solid, but it is difficult to proc, so it makes sense that he's cheaper, because he still isn't very tough. Singri is attached at the hip to Gunnar Brand, so not much to talk about there. Ogroid Myrmidon, I am glad to see go down, because I really think Ogroid Therodons are a solid unit, but the Myrmidon was holding them back, because it's really hard to run Therodons, because the only way to get them regimented outside of Bellicor or Kaon or Abraxia is through this Myrmidon, so I'm glad to see him be cheaper just to make them a little bit more useful. Chaos Chariots, very happy to see these guys go down, because Chaos Chariots were way too expensive for what they did. And at 100 points, I think they're much easier to use as simply a unit that goes off and does secondaries. Very, very glad to see them go down, because their damage is not good and they're not very tough. But just 100 points for an objective grabber is useful. Chosen, I'm honestly surprised. I thought Chosen would be quite weak, but it seems they're doing well enough. They got a points hike, which makes sense. Crit mortals are strong. There's a lot to like on Chaos Chosen. I think I was too harsh to them in my initial appraisal. And then Chaos Furies, this makes total sense. Chaos Furies were just great objective grabbers, and I wouldn't be surprised if we started to see maybe a little less Furies, more Chariots. But then again, Furies do have their benefits. They're flying infantry. At 110, they're still fine for their objective things, though they, of course, do negative damage. Chaos Knights at 250 definitely just gained ground on the Chaos Chosen, where I think Knights were already good. They're even better now that Chosen aren't competing with them quite as much. Legionary spawn, Warriors, Fell Riders, Marauders, and Savagers, completely unchanged. The Wilder Fiend, I think, is good that he went down. He wasn't doing too much before, and at 20 less points, he's significantly better. The Fulmoroid Crusher, similar thing. He lacked a lot of his own sort of a place in the army, and at 140, I think he works fine enough as just kind of a guy to hurl rocks and have some shooting in this army, because slaves famously have no shooting. Gorby's Chariot, also glad to see this go down, because I like Gorby's Chariots more than I like normal Chariots, because I think Gorby's are really cool looking. So at 110 points, I think it's a fair upgrade, because the Gorby's hits so much harder. Relative, he's still a Chariot. He hits so much harder, so it's definitely nice to get him cheaper, and he's still fast. He's good for objectives. The Mutilith Vortex Beast, I think is interesting to see him go down, because I think you could do a very maybe not interesting, but at least it gets the mind going about something with that regeneration aura alongside with the Mutilith's innate regeneration. And at 180 points, I think they're tough enough that they do have some merit in just being there to tie up enemies. Therodon's getting a buff, I think, is really good. I thought their damage was good, but their defense was really bad. And their defense isn't going to be great now, but it is nice to see them be not quite as paper thin. I mean, these guys are 3 models, so they're 60 points a model. They do hit really hard. I mean, they're Orgrid Therodons. They are as they were. They hit hard, but they're not going to stay around very long. So the Slaughter Brute getting a points bump, or a points decrease, I think is good, because the Slaughter Brute, a lot of the monsters for the Slaves to Darkness were not very good, is how I would put it. They have the monster problem of 4+2+. The Slaughter Brute, his attacks were, they were big and meaty, but there weren't a lot of them, and he wasn't hitting with most of them. So he really did need something, and I think being 10-12% cheaper, whatever this is going to help the Slaughter Brute be a lot less sort of just kind of a distraction Carnifex. Soul Grinders, still expensive. I think they're pretty fine. No need to upgrade them. And then Varangard getting a points bump isn't surprising. Varangard are very apocalyptic when they get into melee. And at 320 points, they still are going to hit very hard, though their durability really does start to show how not tough they are when it compares to the Knights, who I'd say now have gained even more ground on these guys now that they're 70 points more expensive. Which 70 points, that's getting you something, right? That it's overall the Knights have gained a lot of ground, which is cool because I like Chaos Knights quite a lot, even though I wish their kit wasn't so monopose. But overall, I think Slaves are in a fine enough place points-wise. I've been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.